What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday. Today we are continuing with the conversation of the Bayverse Breakdown. This is part 3 of 6. Feels like part 30 of 50,000. Once again, I want to reiterate that this is not about comparing it to G1. Obviously, there are some things regarding character that need to be discussed in terms of the history of Transformers and the lineage of the characters. But it's not about, well, this isn't G1 or that isn't G1. I'm trying to leave that out and just sort of approach these movies as just movies. And also talk about the timelines and the confusing elements of the lore, which I do think it does muddy. So let's begin with the story. Once again, we get more information on the history of the Transformers that don't necessarily align with what we have known in the past. We know that during the Great War, an Autobot ship escaped carrying tech to quote-unquote win the war. And it was titled the Ark, and Sentinel Prime was on it, carrying pillars that are described as having the ability to reshape the universe. But when used collectively, they can activate a space bridge. This was going to be used for transporting refugees, weapons, equipment, and troops during the war. However, the term reshape the universe makes me think of terraforming. That's not exactly what it does. We'll get back to it. The ship was attacked, thought to be destroyed, but crashed on the dark side of the moon in 1961. Awareness of this crash sparked a space race between the Russians and the Americans, which led to Apollo 11 finding the robots in 1969. Now, it should also be noted that the Russians found traces of them in 1963. So the Pentagon is aware. And why did the Ark carrying the pillars leave Cybertron during the war? Shrug emoji. Meanwhile, we see that Sam has a new girlfriend. He's trying to get a job. She works at a dealership by a character revealed later to be a villain, and they own a couple Transformer pets. It's also established that Earth has started to adapt to the Transformers and has implemented energon detectors so that they can detect Transformer life while it's in disguise. There's a military operation going on in the Ukraine, along with the Autobots, that establishes they're still working with the government, however still a bit untrusting, and they're looking for something. And that something is connected to the moon. Now, how do they know it's there? Why are they there? How did we get there? Shrug emoji. But the Autobots do learn of the moon's history, and they go to it to find Sentinel Prime, which they bring back to Earth to revive with the Matrix. Enter Megatron, who is now in the shape of a Mad Max truck, and he's getting elephants to hail him. Now, as intelligent life that has scavenged the internet for most of human information, why does he think that elephants will hail him? Shrug emoji. We learn that getting the Autobots to the moon to bring back the cargo is all part of the Decepticon Plan, because Prime is the only one that can revive Sentinel Prime with the Matrix. It's also established that Decepticons have hundreds of these pillars, while the Autobots and the Pentagon only have a handful. Laserbeak is then ordered to kill them all, which we don't really understand why. It's kind of brushed over, but it's not really thoroughly explained, and that's where we meet Mr. Wang. Now, this individual's narrative point is only to introduce Sam to the overall plot of the story. Laserbeak then swiftly kills him. Aware of the plan, Sam goes to the Autobots in an attempt to get involved, but he's kind of forced out, so instead he goes to the Sector 7 guy who's just finished a book titled Codename Hero and now dresses like Neo from the Matrix. The two of them go looking for the Russian cosmonauts to find more information, and they get into a bar brawl, which doesn't really serve the plot. Why? Kanye shrug. Switch it up. Shortly after that, Sentinel Prime flips, kills Ironhide, and takes the pillars, who later uses his force powers to set up the pillars and gets the robots from the moon. Come on down to Earth and get involved. It's during this time that the new love interest's boss kidnaps her, and the Decepticons place a parasite in Sam to spy on him and make sure that he doesn't alert the Autobots to any of the Decepticon plan. Sentinel Prime, having made his existence well known to the world now, makes false promises and states that basically he'll do his thing and leave in peace if the humans exile the Autobots. But he really plans on using the humans as slaves to rebuild Cybertron on Earth. We're introduced to the Wreckers, who have been working on the Xantharium, which is a ship that is established, brought a second wave of Autobots to Earth. I'm guessing the wave between movies 1 and 2. They've been working on this ship and have designed a space in the booster rockets for a secret compartment, basically. They get on the ship, they head on out into outer space, and Starscream destroys the ship. We're led to believe that the Autobots were destroyed, but they were hid in the booster rockets. And the first one had already hit the water safely. The big battle ensues. The humans do what the humans do in these movies, which is obliterate most of the Decepticon forces. Sam kills Laserbeak and Starscream. The Autobots are captured shortly after Bumblebee helps Sam escape from the explosion of Starscream. How is he captured? Shrug emoji. And they get out of it shortly thereafter. During that, Bumblebee kills Soundwave. The humans basically kill Shockwave. Prime ultimately finishes him, but they've worn him down so far by that point that they basically did most of the work. The space bridge is initiated 2 times. One time time it freezes and locks half of Cybertron or a quarter of Cybertron in the orbit of Earth, you would think that when that was shut off, it would just slice that part of Cybertron off, but then they initiate it again and it seems to come through. However, then they destroy the pillars and it seems to create a black hole that kind of sucks it all out. It doesn't make much sense to me why. But back to our main heroes. The new love interest basically convinces Megatron that after the battle is over, he'll be second fiddle to Sentinel Prime, who will be the ruler of Earth. Megatron doesn't take this well, and even though he's very smart and able to lay out elaborate plans in order to get Sentinel Prime into service, to take over the Earth and restore Cybertron to its glory, he overlooked this detail and he's easily manipulated by a young lady because he's afraid of being called Sentinel's bitch. At which point he goes and swiftly dispatches Sentinel Prime, then Optimus Prime decapitates Megatron, Optimus Prime executes Sentinel Prime, and we pretty much roll to credits. So once again, we'll do this in a reverse compliment sandwich. Let's start with the potty humor. There's still some in here. It's not as bad as the second one, and probably even better than the first one, but we do have some. Sam's mom says gorgeous box at some point, shortly after referencing the new girlfriend. Mr. Wang says deep Wang like 100 times. The whole bathroom scene with him is absurd, silly, ridiculous, and falls into this category. And Sam's mom suggests that Sam read the book She Comes First. It's rinse and repeat how I feel about all this stuff. It's a children's franchise. It should be for children. It should also have a story that has merit for adults. I don't think the sexual innuendos, especially of this nature, are necessarily the most appropriate choice. I'm okay with films being darker and making children sort of step up and raise their bar and their level of maturity to handle it, i.e. Planet of the Apes, Dark Knight, 89 Batman, Winter Soldier, Infinity War, etc., but it should still be for children. And once again, there's far too many factions taking far too much space in the actual plot and story of this film. We've got NASA, Sector 7, the Sam Fam, Autobots, Decepticons, the military, Russian cosmonauts, Tyrese Ness that has basically become retired, the human bad guy. Once again, it's just too many moving pieces. It's the same thing that all of these films kind of suffer from. You can mainline these movies a lot. You don't need the Sector 7 guy in this movie at all. The only plot purpose he serves is the whole Russian cosmonaut bit, and you don't really need them either. There's also too many plot elements and story elements and components of this movie that they just give to you and expect for you to accept it without any sort of explanation. It's what my shrug emojis have been kind of trying to illustrate during this conversation. I also have an issue with the pillars and the way that they were described and the way that they work. It doesn't really seem to make sense, and also the fact that they said that they was used to reshape the universe. And maybe it's my own perception of that, but that to me seems like terraforming. But what they're gonna do is bring Cybertron into Earth, which doesn't really seem like reshaping the universe as much as it seems like knocking Earth out of... I don't know how that was gonna work. I don't understand that. It doesn't make sense to me. And then Cybertron, if it was to kind of take Earth's place, or maybe it was like a Cybertron spirit that was gonna encompass the Earth, I don't understand it. I don't get it, and I don't feel like it's thoroughly explained. I don't know. It's too many questions that whole thing raises that I don't feel like any of it is thoroughly or even remotely explained. But there are good things about this movie, and let's get into those. So I love when fictional elements end up explaining real-world situations, i.e. the space race. That the whole space race was based on American and Russian intel to get to the moon in order to get the technology that they think has crashed on the moon or have evidence to suggest thereof. I dig that. It's the same thing I thought when I saw G1, and I always thought the arc hitting the Earth was responsible for the death of the dinosaurs. Turns out the time doesn't quite work, but I always loved that. I love little things like that, where fictional universes explain real-world mysteries. I love the Energon detectors. For me, that's like an element of world building. It's showing that the human race is learning to adapt to these aliens being around, and since they can hide in plain sight, you have this technology that would allow you to spot them, pick them out, and disable them from being able to infiltrate any sort of protected space. I dig that. I think it says more about that world culturally than we kind of gave it credit for. I think the character design of Shockwave kind of works. Like, it has the one eye and the two ears, which is really the most kind of iconic and indicative things about the character. You can kind of see that this is the beginning where they were like, you know what, let's try to hone in the iconic nature of these characters just a bit. So I dug that. I like John Malkovich just because I enjoy John Malkovich, but he really doesn't serve this story much at all. All of that could have just been removed from the movie, and the movie would have been better for it, but I just still enjoy seeing him. Getting to see Prime's trailer and having the trailer kind of transform into this weapons cache, it always feels good, right? And this is no exception. The effects throughout the movie, like the visual effects, look fantastic. fantastic. It's the best that these films have ever looked, and this one is like leaps and bounds above. There are certain scenes in there where I had to really question what was done practically and what was done with CGI. Like, there's some really, really impressive work that's done there. I also really like the fight scene between the black SUVs and Bumblebee. Bumblebee has to jump over the thing, transforms, you know, grabs Sam, throws him back in his chest, transforms back into a car, and he's like, that's all really choreographed beautifully, and it works really well. I wish I cared who those Decepticons were. It would make it more meaningful, but that scene is really laid out and blocked very well. When Starscream transforms and shoots down the shuttle, that seems like a very, like, Starscream Decepticon thing to do. Like, I like that a lot conceptually. I think this soundtrack is the best of all of them, and I think the Sentinel Prime theme is the single best composed Transformers piece of music ever done. It feels like Transformers to me. It has the power and the kind of depth of the lore that I see in this franchise that I feel like they're never really able to kind of quite get out to the people in mass, but that music is phenomenal. It's my favorite piece of Transformers music. And this movie has my favorite scene in any of the live-action Transformers movies, which is when Buzz Aldrin and Optimus Prime meet one another, and Buzz Aldrin says, as a, you know, fellow space traveler, it's an honor to meet you, and Optimus Prime kneels down before Buzz Aldrin and says, the honor is mine. That, to me, is the character of Optimus Prime. Now, they do the exact 180 to this character in about an hour and a half later in this movie, but that moment, the human technology to get from Earth to the moon is so insignificant compared to the technology that the Transformers have in regards to traveling. However, because of that, Optimus Prime is aware of the risks and the bravery involved to make that voyage, which you can say is far more than what he had to do when he made his voyage, because the technology was so greater, it was more dependable. It's the difference between an astronaut now and a jet pilot. The risks are different. So for Optimus Prime, who has the ability to do far more than what Buzz Aldrin did, but be aware of the bravery it took and to say the honor is mine, like, that is what makes Optimus Prime to me. It's that awareness. It's that being able to put things into perspective in order to understand the larger picture. I can go on and on about it. It is without a doubt, my favorite scene in any of these live action movies. It feels so right and true to that character. Which brings us to the bad. And I'm gonna stay on Optimus Prime for a minute. My biggest issue with this movie, and where they really start to lose sight of who that character is if he walks up to Sentinel Prime and executes him. There's a difference between killing and executing. Optimus Prime is a soldier in a war. He's done plenty of killing, I would imagine. But walking up to someone who is beaten and shooting them in the head, I believe the back of the head, and that movie made Optimus Prime an executioner. And that's a problem. And there's no remorse. There's absolutely no remorse in that action. It's just business as usual for him. I really have an issue with that. And I find the Shockwave tentacle monster to be absurd. There's also plot components of these movies where it doesn't seem like the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. They keep implementing these little things into the history of Transformers, which is why I'm doing the timeline. And in doing so, make certain other elements of the storyline harder to conceive and believe. So let's take a look at the new information that we have in the timeline.
And this should be updated, by the way, with the proper dates. I'm not 1000% sure, but I believe it to be correct. But the question is raised, since the Cybertronian life is already sort of knowledge within government agencies, I feel like connections should be made to all of these government agencies that we have to follow their storylines for whatever reason in these films as to the impact that these multiple discoveries are having. But instead, each time it happens, it seems like a major surprise. I also am curious as to Megatron being discovered in 1897 and then being brought to the Hoover Dam in 1934. What is happening between those two segments? Now let's wrap up.
This is my favorite one. Doesn't mean I love it. I like it enough. But I don't think it's the best one. But I think it's solid. It's my favorite one because a core element of the plot, which are these pillars, right, deals around Sentinel Prime. And Sentinel Prime's character has real investment and real stakes and real relationships with with Optimus. And that is the most we've ever seen of a Transformer live action movie that actually centers around the robots. Now, does it center around the robots? No. It's just the one that we've seen that's the closest to, and that's why it's my favorite. What they do with these pillars and these sparks and these matrices and all of this stuff is, it's like the Harry Potter movie trope. Every Harry Potter movie, I don't mean to offend Harry Potter fans. I'm sure there's some, and I think they're fine. But every Harry Potter movie introduces some new spell or some new magical element or some new trick, and that trick or spell or magical element becomes the key to beating the odds at the end. And this one is similar in the fact that every movie becomes about some sort of artifact that's ancient, and then that ancient artifact becomes the major threat and opens up the world to a larger place. But after a third movie of that, you just start to become numb to it, and none of it means anything anymore. And the reason why they rely on these tropes is because they refuse to rely on the character, and that's the problem. So I give it a 7 out of 10. I also think that the movie could have probably ended here for the series as a trilogy and been done, and it would have never had to live long enough to see itself become the villain. I think had it died a hero, it could have been more fondly remembered, but because we have Age of Extinction and Last Night, and you know, like, it just gets worse and worse and more diluted and more problematic, and that's the issue here, is that they could have probably wrapped this up here with Megatron dead, Prime saving the world, he vows to always defend Earth, and it could have just been done. I also think it's unfortunate that we lost old Crazy Thumbs. They say they lost her because it's all sorts of bullshit, but why they lost her was because she called Michael Bay a Nazi on set, which I think she said kind of jokingly, like he's like ordering around and being a dictator on set. And I think he got his little whole jeans, shaggy hair from the 80s feelings hurt and refused to hire her. And the issue with that is that, like, dude, you've taken shots at tons of cultures, races, sexes in just these 3 movies. And now when somebody says one thing about you, your feelings are weak. Weak, Mac. So I think it's a bummer, but I think they could have all wrapped up this series in those 3 movies and been done. But they had to continue. Why? Shrug emoji. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.